getting into part 3. As I said, it's no way I can do, only 3 parts. It's so much more to this series that, I have to cover to get to the conclusion. And there's no way I can do it in 3, videos. So it's going to have to be a part of 4 or 5 and possibly a final part 6. Maybe. It depends. It's so much. It's not going to be more than 6 if it's, if it goes that far. So, I should be able to cover everything within that because there's a lot you have to get and grasp. Obviously, you've been watching since part 1, so you purchased this, even though this series contains part 1 and 2. But you start to understand where this stuff is heading a little bit and what it's alluding to, which is basically a past that no one is talking about. You won't really find too many videos like this on YouTube. And a lot of people don't get into this information because it leads into an area where it's not, so much evidence. It's not so much proof, easily found as there is, proof to refute the Bible or ancient Egyptian proof. The proof is out there nonetheless. You have to know where to look. Now, where I left off in part 2, we was getting into the whole reptilian thing, who the reptilians are, who are these people who the Jews portray to be. They are rulers, they are monarchs, but who are they really? And I left off getting into the whole reptilian thing and talking about dragons and all the mythology of dragons and everything else. There is so much more to this that you must understand in order for us to go further. So we're going to get into this a lot because it boggles your mind when you start to think about this whole story of dinosaurs. I mean, what really happened? How are people, recently talking about seeing dinosaurs and encountering dragons and stuff like that? Why are they so worshipped more than anything else? The dragons and all this dragon culture and mythology is everywhere. So we're going to get into that here. So now let's get right into this whole thing. I have a lot of information. Now, the thing is, I really want you to think it's dinosaurs. I really want you to think about dinosaurs and everything that entails. All the information that we have gotten over the years about dinosaurs. Really get into that. Now, when you think dragons, think dinosaurs. The problem is when most people, think about dinosaurs, they believe dinosaurs are these, beasts, these reptiles that existed millions of years ago before, mankind. And we read stories about, dragons and, dragon slayers and the knights versus the dragons, slaying the dragon to save the princess, all this and that is always found in mythology. And we are led to believe that dragons are these mythological beasts that existed a long time ago. And dinosaurs existed millions of years ago. And people think that they are just 2 separate species. You got a dragon species and you got dinosaurs, and they are totally separate from each other. For the most part, that is what people think when they think about the 2. So now understand, it wasn't until 1824 that we get the word reptile. It wasn't until 1842 that Richard Owens gives us the name dinosaur. So we're talking about 1842, fairly recent in history, that we finally get the name dinosaur. Think about that. Now, dinosaur means great lizard. So 1763 is when the first official writings of what we call today dinosaur was recorded. 1763. So when they recorded these writings, they wasn't even calling it dinosaur then because the name didn't come until much later. So when you look at all the ancient stories and depictions about dragons and all these stories about dragons, when you look at all this stuff, before the 1800s, when you look at the pictures and the depictions, these dragons look like dinosaurs in most of the accounts. Now, the thing is, before they was called dinosaurs by, Richard Owen and everybody else, they called them dragons. So think about this. This changes everything. When you understand that before dinosaurs was called dinosaurs, they called them dragons. So think about the mythology. So we're going to say that dinosaurs are real and actually existed. and they called them dragons. And then we find all of this mythology and all these stories and tales about dragons, when you have the Chinese put the dragon on the zodiac. Everything else on that Chinese zodiac, as I showed, is real, and we are to believe that the dragon is mythological. And you have all these prominent people writing about dragons and seeing these things. When you finally understand that they called them dragons before dinosaurs, everything changes. How many people know that? It's some reason why they want to cover this up. We're going to get into that, because you have to think that, well, wait a minute. If they called them dragons before dinosaurs, then what about all these stories that we are reading and finding about dragons? So we're going to get into that. So now this gives validity to all of the ancient stories and depictions. And understand, they have found so many depictions of men walking with dinosaurs. A lot of ancient depictions of men talking about dinosaurs and walking with dinosaurs. These people drew the dinosaurs. How the hell could they draw a dinosaur, so long ago, when we didn't really start discovering fossils until the 1800s? They wasn't even written about till the 1700s. So if you find depictions, drawings of a dinosaur before that, that should tell you something. That basically is proof positive that men walked with dinosaurs or dragons. It's proof. So then you have to go back and look at these stories and say, well, it's truth to it. But the big question is, why would they lie and tell us that dinosaurs existed millions of years before us and they died out because of some meteor and this and that? And the whole question now becomes, when you think about it, okay, if men walk with these dinosaurs or dragons, somehow they became extinct. They're gone. So what happened that killed off these huge dinosaurs, killed them off, but left us alive? And that's something I was getting into in part 2. We know it's recorded that some kind of cataclysmic event took place that wiped out a lot of people and perhaps the dinosaurs, and anything that was small enough to survive underground, lived. Is it possible there could have been some dinosaurs that survived underground? Yes, we're going to get into that later, because that's huge. But think about it. How could something wipe them out and not us? And we got to really, really dig into that question. But the real point I'm trying to make is, why cover it up? Why not just tell us, hey, yeah, we existed with these dinosaurs until something happened? They hid the truth for a reason. And when you get into everything that goes along with this, then it gives more validity to this whole reptilian story. So understand, none of this is new. A lot of times we look at things on YouTube and we believe that, this is new information or it just came out. You got to understand, you have people been talking about this for hundreds of years, a long time. That's how I started getting into it. You find books on people just really getting into, well, wait a minute, it's too much proof that tells us and shows us that dinosaurs and men walked together. They existed together.
Now, this is like the midway point of the video or the DVD. I wanted to jump in real quick and say a few things. This series, again, is really going to combine a lot of the biblical doctrines and try to basically decode them to show you what they're really getting into. So we got into the Bible. We'll probably get into the Quran as well, and the Torah. We got into the book of Enoch, and it's a lot of other, Zoroastrianism and a lot of other doctrines that you have to combine. As I said before, we know the Masons have the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran on the altar in the Masonic Lodge. It's a reason for that. And we're going to really dig into those, because those are the main ones. The King James Version is the key. That's why it's the authorized version. This is the one that really holds the secret. That's why we use it. You can refer to the ESV and all the other Bibles as well, because, they're just going to give you a better definition or a more clear understanding of the Bible verses. But really, it's all the same. It's all off of the King James Version anyway. Once you learn to break it down and understand the codes, it's not so hard. So that's what this series is really going to be getting into and really hitting on. It's the codes, the keys that's in these biblical doctrines. And as you can see, as we've been going in the first and second Saturn Satan videos, that a lot of information is coming out that a lot of people was completely unaware of. And I'm glad you guys purchased this DVD to get this content and to get this information. So let's continue with the DVD.
So now, all of these stories, the proof that we have gives more validity to this whole reptilian story. Now remember, they was talking about people like Herodotus and Marco Polo, Josephus, talking about seeing these beasts, these dragons. So you have to think about it. Think about the Bible. What did the Bible call Satan? Called him the dragon, the beast, the dragon. So think about it. These beasts walking around back then, these dragons walking around, this had to be an issue for the people. The people had to be dealing with the fact that, wait a minute, we got these huge beasts walking around. They probably was eating people and causing all kinds of destruction. Think about it. So this is something that people would write about, that they would depict, and will be completely scared of course. So what did they do? They played off the people's fear, and they gave us a doctrine about these beasts, this dragon that evolved over time into what we know today as Satan, what we know today as the whole Bible story. And as I go along, you're going to see that a little bit more clear. Think about it. You got these beasts walking around. You got people probably fleeing into different areas to escape what was going on. When you really get into it, when you look around and see that, we have all these underground caves and caverns, and we can see that for thousands of years, people lived underground. That is a proven fact. That's how they survived whatever catastrophe happened. The thing is that what makes sense that they would live underground, if above you had these dinosaurs walking around or dragons walking around causing all this ruckus. So we have these stories of men fighting this dragon and this beast. Wasn't mythology, it was tales of, men going out and conquering these great dragons that obviously most of the people had fear of. And the stories probably was created, to combat that fear or to explain what was going on and, what was happening with these beasts. So, of course, later on, you would have that story evolve. You got God versus Satan, which is the dragon. Now, think about it. In part 2, I was telling you about the story of Zeus versus Typhon or Typhoon. Now, how do they describe Typhon? They describe them as this beast, this dragon with multiple heads. When you read Revelations 12:3, how do they describe Satan? Satan as this dragon, this beast, having multiple heads. They said he had 7 heads. Revelations 12:3. So when you go and you look at these stories and you start thinking about the Bible and how many times it's really talking about dragons, and you understand that dragons are dinosaurs, this changes a lot. And you're going to really get this as we go along in this series, because the conclusion of this is, it's going to be mind-boggling when you put it all together, but it's something that you really have to study is your dragon mythology and everything that we have on dinosaurs. So understand that a lot of these stories are old. This whole thing goes back a long time about dragons, and it's been so well hidden from, the public. It's not been put out there on the forefront as being fact, just stories that people have found. If you read archaeologists' books and you start reading books by paleontologists and they start talking about these stories and the comparison between these dragons and dinosaurs, then you start to understand, and then you realize that, well, wait a minute, this book is dated 1800s or this book is dated, 1920 or 1930. It's like, well, wait a minute, these stories have been around for a long time and we never heard about them, about the comparison between the dragons and these dinosaurs and all the stories, the mythologies we are told, but the stories of what's going on. These people wrote about this stuff. So now I want you to start thinking about these first stories being like, religious stories, the first religious stories, or a religious story of some sort. When you start to read a lot of the stories, you always find that the people sacrifice lambs to the dragon. That's one of the most common things you're going to find. Sacrificing lambs to the dragon. There's a story from Krakow, Poland about the Valval dragon. You have a man named Scuba who basically took a lamb and he stuffed it with sulfur and he sacrificed it to the dragon. The dragon eats the lamb and it kills him. So this is a story they wrote about. It's another version of this story about King Krakus, his two sons. He had his sons go out and basically slay this dragon. The problem is they argued about who would get the credit for killing this dragon because they knew only one of them could be king. So Leech or Lek, the one son, kills his brother Krakius II, and he blames it on the dragon, and he becomes king and he assumes the throne. Now, later the truth comes out and they banish him. Now, the thing is, they actually have a statue of this Valval dragon. It's called Valval dragon. They pronounce their W's with a V sound. They have this statue there in Krakow, Poland. And the reason why it's called Krakow is supposed to be named after Krakius II, pronounced Krakow. So it's a lot of dragon stories out there, a lot of dragon mythology, but you're always going to find lambs being sacrificed to these dragons. So they had to sacrifice these lambs to the dragon because, of course, if they didn't feed them, then the dragons would come deeper into their towns or villages and start eating people or terrorizing. So they sacrificed the lambs to these dragons. So in sacrificing these lambs to the dragons, these lambs became what? Their saviors. So I know it sounds crazy. It's like, oh, come on. Almost sounds corny. I thought so too when I was reading it. So I was like, well, wait a minute. I got to do some more research on this. But when you go and you start researching this, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's not far-fetched. It's all over the place of these stories about lambs being sacrificed to these dragons. And it makes sense. Remember, I was talking about in the previous video how the original symbol for Christianity was what? The lamb on the cross. The lamb being the savior. Think about that. So then this also explains why we don't get the image of Christ on the cross until 800 years after the crucifixion. So now remember, in part 2, I was talking about how the Jews are supposed to carry this reptilian bloodline and how they are the ones who are controlling everything and ruling everything. They are the ones who are the monarchs. They are the ones who have this bloodline that goes back. So when you look at that and you think about these stories of these people sacrificing the lamb to these dragons, you have to think about the Jewish Passover. They sacrifice the lamb the eve of Passover and they eat the lamb the night of Passover. So here you have this whole tradition of these Jews who are supposed to carry this reptilian bloodline, this dragon bloodline or what have you, who do the same thing. They celebrate this sacrificing of the lamb and they eat the lamb just like the dragons do in this story. So when you start to go back to the Bible and read some of these stories, when you look at John 8:44, what did Jesus say? He says to the Jews, ye are like your father, the devil. Who is Satan? Satan is the dragon. When you read Revelations 3:9, behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, but are not, but do lie. 2 Corinthians 4:4 refers to Satan as being the god of this world. And we know when you do the whole translation, when you look at the whole parable, when you start to understand everything, they are calling themselves God. The government, this white man, well, not per se this white man, but that's who they are. This white man calling themselves God. That's why I did the whole video on the government is in fact God Almighty, because that's who they refer to themselves as. They are God. So when you have the Bible saying that Satan is the god of this world, meaning Satan is this dragon, you have these Jews being this, having this reptilian bloodline, basically supposedly coming from these these reptilian beings who they control the world, they run everything. So now I want you to think about it, because people always ask me this question of why do these celebrities always talk about Jesus and praise God and this and that? Who is God? Who are they really praising? They are praising the system. They are praising the Jews, or the ones who run this world. That's who their God is. That's why they think God and they think Jesus, and they wear the two crosses, because they know who it represents. It goes back to them. They are the ones putting them in power. This is why all this stuff goes on with the whole so-called Illuminati thing, and everything else is all wrapped into this. You have to really start to pay attention when you start connecting the dots. Yeah, of course they praise Jesus and they talk about God and God this and God that, because they want the respect. These Jews want the respect from these people as saying, we put you in power, we gave you money, we gave you fame, you better thank me, I'm God. That's what they put into their Bible. Remember when I read to you about how the Bible talks about, the government, and honor them and pray for them, and they are the ones who basically are in charge. It's the Jews talking about themselves, them being God, the government being God, or the so-called white man being God. It's them portraying themselves as God. Remember, in Romans 13, it says, let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for the powers that be are ordained by God. Remember, who are the powers that be? You have the government. You have these Jews. They are the one who is controlling everything. So you got to start piecing this thing together. And when you start connecting the dots, and when you start to really get into the hard questions, who created these dinosaurs? Who created these reptilians? Who created us? You got to really look at the fact that we have this reptilian DNA. We have dinosaurs and man coexisting. We share a common thing. When you look at the fact that these women worship these reptiles and these serpent beings, and it's so much that happened. We know it's depictions of this war, this fight between these dragons and these humans, and so many people talked about it. It's a lot that happened that they are covering up for a reason. It's a major reason why they do not want us to know this. And it's a lot of information we got to get into before we get to that point. So remember the whole Passover story where, they sacrificed the lamb and used the blood to put over the door so that the angel of death would pass over them and not kill them. The same thing when you read these stories, they used the lamb's blood and made a trail to lead away from the town where they were staying at, so that the dragon would follow the trail and go straight to the lambs and eat the lambs. So you can see why they would, celebrate that, why they would worship something like a lamb being sacrificed to save their lives. So now remember, it was Pope Hadrian I in the 6th Synod of Constantinople. He was the one who decreed that the lamb should be replaced by a man. This is where we get 800 years later, the depiction of Jesus on the cross instead of the lamb. So now think about it. You have in the Bible, Satan being depicted as a man, an angel. Then you have Satan being depicted as a dragon, a beast. One of the things that should boggle people's mind is why a dragon? Of everything they could have depicted Satan as, they depicted him as a dragon. So you have a dragon and a man, a dragon and a man. You have this so-called reptilian shapeshifter, shape-shifting from a reptilian and a human or man. So you can see the comparison. You have Satan, man, and dragon. These reptilians, man and reptilian or dragon, whatever you want to call them. These are all things, when you start to go back and look at the story, gives validity to everything. And to most people who read it, it sounds far-fetched until you start really getting into the information. So once people get their head around the fact that dinosaurs and man coexisted, and that dragons are dinosaurs, they are one and the same. Dragons are not mythological, they are in fact dinosaurs. Once y'all get around that, you'll be fine. So now understand, in 1934, the Los Angeles Times, they printed an article on these underground lizards. Here is the article itself right here. It's the actual article. So now they were saying that, they found like this lair where supposedly these underground lizards or reptilians lived, and they talked to the Hopi Indians about it, and the Hopi Indians actually backed up the story, because the Hopi Indians had all kinds of stories about these reptilian beings living underground and interacting with them, who basically lived in Phoenix and to California, where they supposedly had these encounters with these reptilian beings. They had all kinds of ancient stories. So this obviously sparked the interest way back then in the 1930s about these, reptilian beings or these lizard people. It had people talking about it. Then you had in 1982 in Arizona, supposedly they found the remains or the bones of this humanoid reptilian being. No pictures, no video, just the story of them supposedly finding this reptilian being. Again, it sparked a lot of interest in the whole thing. Months later, you had Russell Burroughs find what everybody probably know about if you do research into this as the caves in Illinois, in southern Illinois. He found these caves. He was supposedly spelunkering or something like that, and found this cave where he pulled out a bunch of artifacts that go back to ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. The thing is, he never took any outsiders, any people from the press or any archaeologists to this site and showed them the actual cave. You have a picture of him crawling through this cave, as you can see, and he brought out artifacts. And the thing is, these artifacts were supposed to be Egyptian, and a lot of these artifacts had depictions of these reptilian beings. So, of course, it got a lot of people's attention, but it was discovered later that they was fakes. The whole thing was a hoax. He never showed anybody the actual cave, and in 1989, he's supposed to have dynamited the entrance to this cave. Now, when you go and study this, if you go look it up, his name is Russell Burroughs, you'll see that it's a lot that goes along with this story. Supposedly, you got other people saying that this was the tomb for Alexander the Great and other people, and he supposedly had found this golden coffin and all this other stuff. There's a lot of stuff that goes along with this story, but officially, the whole thing is a fake. But, of course, the whole reptilian thing brought up a lot more talk of this whole thing. Then you had later on in 1989, well, I'll read the article. It says here, 1982. It says, in 1982, Dale Russell, then curator of vertebrate fossils at the National Museum of Canada in Ottawa, conjectured a possible evolutionary path for Troodon if it not had perished in a catatonic extinction over 65 million years ago, suggesting that it could have evolved into intelligent beings similar in body plan to humans. Over geologic time, Russell noted that there had been a steady increase in the encephalization quotient, or EQ, the relative brain weight when compared to other species with the same body weight among the dinosaurs. Russell had discovered the first troodonid skull and noted that while its EQ was low compared to humans, it was 6 times higher than that of other dinosaurs. Russell suggested that if the trend in troodon evolution had continued to be present, its brain case could by now measure 1,100 centimeters, comparable to that of a human. So you had people talking about the reptilians so much back then, even though we never heard about it. They obviously kept it from the press, the mainstream press, but a lot of people was talking about these reptilian beings for a long time, and I guess this was their plan to kind of get an explanation out to the public of what it could possibly be. But you have this guy and other people talking about the fact that there could possibly be, or could have been, this humanoid looking reptilian or evolved dinosaur form from the troodon and other dinosaurs to look more like us humans. So yeah, it's obviously something strange going on with this human dinosaur connection, and we really got to examine that. When you think about this whole catastrophic event, or whatever happened with the flood, or whatever happened that destroyed so much of the planet and killed off the dinosaurs and killed off a lot of stuff, as I said, you got to realize that people probably was living underground, so they didn't get the full extent of whatever happened. And then they probably was trapped under there for, hundreds of years, who knows how long. And when they came out of the caves and came from underground years later, when they started to find food when they went out, then of course they was running into these dinosaurs, to these dragons. They was running into them, and it was causing battles and conflicts. But you can imagine there wasn't as many left as there was before, because of whatever happened, whatever destroyed them. Was only a little bit left. So they wasn't running into so much. So there was probably, little skirmishes back and forth between what was left of this dinosaur race. Could these theropods have went underground? Because when you look at the size, check it out, the size of a theropod, it wasn't that much bigger than a human. So it's something that a human could possibly handle in a fight if he had a weapon. But could it be possible that he went underground and evolved into what, these archaeologists and people, these paleontologists and other people are saying could have possibly happened? You have to check out that whole story. But I always go back into the Bible, because I'm telling you, everything we are trying to figure out and everything we wondering, they know. So when you go into the Bible, because the Bible always talks about this stuff, and we just don't realize it. But remember, before I was talking about the whole Adam and Eve story, how Eve and the serpent is symbolic of Eve having sex with the serpent, because something has to explain this reptilian DNA that humans have. So if you have these dinosaurs possibly evolving and becoming intelligent and evolving into these humanoid beings and possibly having sex with human women, that's something that is mind-boggling, but it wouldn't give us the DNA that we have. That's something that had to be put into us before all of this happened. It's just something more to this whole reptilian thing where we start to find these traces of it. Whoever created them obviously created us. Why they used some of that DNA with us, I don't know. Like I said, it's something obviously huge going on. But sorry for rambling. Getting back to the symbolic story of Eve and the serpent. You got to think about that. Now remember, I was saying how it's symbolic of her having sex with the serpent. I actually got some comments, a little backlash about that from people saying, well, she ain't have sex with the serpent. The Bible doesn't talk about that. When you go back and read ancient biblical stories, you find stories of Eve having sex with the serpent. So when you go ahead and read stories from Perk the Rabbi Eleazar, it's stated between 900 and 1000 AD, it's basically different versions of Bible stories throughout the ages. Perk the Rabbi Eleazar, when you start to read it, it gives you the different stories from different versions of biblical manuscripts. But when we read here, it says, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, who was pregnant by the angel Samael. That explains this symbol. And she conceived and bare Cain. And he was like the heavenly beings and not like the earthly beings. And she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. So now, when you read that, you think about the book of Enoch. You think about that whole story. The angels coming down and having sex with women. But what if Eve had sex with this angel, who the Bible describes Samael as being a dragon or a serpent as well, or an angel? All the depictions of him show something like a man figure, and sometimes he's like this dragon or, this demon looking being. But you always see the symbolic symbol of him being something more than human. So you have this story, and when you read other parts of it, as you can see right here, it's talking about him riding the serpent, Samael riding the serpent, or riding on the serpent, came to her, and she conceived. Afterwards, Adam came to her, and she conceived. The first editions being the chapter with the expression, it is written. So he's basically explaining like how the different manuscripts said different things about different stories in the Bible. So on another part, it's talking about, it says, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, who was pregnant by the angel Samael, conceived the bear Cain. Another part it says, and Adam knew his wife Eve, who was pregnant by the angel Samuel, and she conceived and bare Cain, and he was like the heavenly beings and not like the earthly beings. And she said, I've acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. It's the same thing. He's just giving you different versions of what it's saying in different manuscripts. So this is basically backing up what I was telling you before. So you had this story of Eve being pregnant by the serpent, or by Samael, or by Satan, or the dragon, whatever one you want to get it. You got to understand it's a parable, so you can pull all that in there. She has Cain. Cain kills Abel. Remember. So then you have eventually everybody's coming from Adam and Eve. So you will have the parents of Noah having this bloodline from Cain, and everybody who was birthed from Cain and his wife having this bloodline be before the flood. So then, Noah is born, and then remember, in the book of Enoch, Noah looks different. He looks like the angels. So understand, this is why I had to put the book of Enoch in part 2, so you can understand the parable of all that. It all fits and ties in together. Now, I know it all seems confusing, but just remember, it's all symbolic of Eve and the serpent. Just like we find in the book of Enoch, you have angels coming down and marrying women and having sex with women. Now, we're going to get back into this whole dinosaur part, later, but I want to get into the Bible, get back into the Bible, and get into some parts of the Bible that people just have no clue of. And when I get into this, you're going to be shocked, because I promise you, most of you have never heard of this, yet it's in the Bible. Preachers, I can't believe preachers don't talk about this. This is something that, when I started to study the Bible and do research on it and take my notes, when I came across all this, it made a lot of sense. It made a lot of things fit. But it's amazing how people have no clue about this. So we're going to get into a part of the Bible that's going to be completely foreign to most people, but it's going to make a lot of sense as we get into it. Now, when you get into the whole book of Enoch, and you get into the Watchers and the Nephilim, this is the problem. People don't realize that the Nephilim are actually the Watchers. They are one and the same. So you had the Watchers, or the angels, coming down and having sex with the women and bearing these children, from the woman. But people just think that, those Nephilim are just totally different beings. The Watchers and the Nephilim are the same beings. First of all, when you look at the word Nephilim, it comes from the word Nephal, which means to fall. Nephilim is just a giant. That's the word we translate it into as giant, but it comes from the word to fall. So think about it like this. When those babies was conceived, when they was, being made or whatever, think about who put that spirit into that baby. I talked about that in part 2. I said, if God put the spirit in those Nephilim children, then he would know what's going on. So you got to understand that it's the Watchers who is animating these Nephilim. So not only are they the Watchers, or the angels, the spirits from above, but they are also the Nephilim as well. And that's something you got to understand. So when it's talking about the Benai Ha Elohim, you have to understand that there are many different types of Elohim. So now when you read the book of Enoch, chapter 15, 8 through 12, it's talking about exactly what I said about how the Elohim, the Benai Ha Elohim, or the Watchers, are in fact the Nephilim. They are the giants. So it says here, and now the giants who have been begotten from body and flesh will be called evil spirits on earth, and their dwelling place will be upon the earth. Evil spirits proceeded from their bodies because they are created from above, their beginning and first basis being from the holy Watchers. See, it's trying to tell you, this is where they come from. They will be evil spirits upon the earth and will be called evil spirits. But the spirits of heaven have their dwelling places in heaven, and the spirits of earth who were born on the earth, note that, who were born on the earth, have their dwelling places on earth. And the spirits of the giants who cast themselves upon the clouds will be destroyed and fall, and will battle and cause destruction on earth and do evil. They will take no kind of food, nor will they become thirsty, and they will be invisible. And these spirits will not rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them in the days of murder and destruction. So now it's saying that the watchers are the giants, as I said, but the spirits of these giants are demons. But now these demons are also the watchers. So you got to understand and put this together. The fallen angels are also the demons, but it's talking about how they are separated. So when you go back to the Bible and you think about Jude 1 verse 6, it says, "And the angels, which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day." So these watchers who fell, the fallen angels, are supposed to be locked away in chains. But also a part of them, which would be these demons, are roaming around the earth because they put some of their energy basically into these Nephilim, into these other bodies. But since they was born on earth, they can't get locked away with the watchers, with the angels. So their spirit is left to wander earth and do what have you, things that the Bible talk about. So when you go back and you read Enoch 15:10, it's saying, "But the spirits of heaven have their dwelling places in heaven, and the spirits of the earth who were born on the earth have their dwelling places on earth. And the spirits of the giants who cast themselves upon the clouds will be destroyed and fall, and will battle and cause destruction on the earth and do evil. They will take no kind of food, nor will they become thirsty, and they will be invisible." So you got to understand, we're talking about two separate energies, but the same energy. So if you get the whole thing, things that we call demons, that they call demons or what have you, are these Nephilim spirits that can't go to heaven. That's why I said they go and they hit the clouds, because they're trying to go into heaven. They can't go into heaven. They was born on earth. He can't cast them to hell because, they're basically in between, which is why their spirit is stuck wandering earth. So if you really get into deeply this whole thing, and, it's people who try to contact these spirits and people who really believe in this stuff and don't get the parable that I'm going to talk about in this video. They don't understand what it's saying. So they actually try to contact these spirits. It's not about contacting spirits. It's about contacting who these spirits represent. And that's something we're going to get into in this video. But it's trying to tell you, of course, this is all metaphorical. This is all, talking about something completely different. But it's trying to say that you basically have two separate entities and that are basically a part of the same, Godhead or being. So now this is where it starts to get a little bit weird. This is where we get into parts of the Bible that most people had no clue about. So now, how many of you actually understood that God had a council? That he had a divine council, like the Jedi council, meaning like, God sitting down and we got people around him, like a council. How many people actually knew that he had a council who advised them and he, gave jobs and asked them to do stuff? How many people knew that? This is one of the things that people have no clue of when I talk about the Bible and I ask them about the God of Israel. So many people talk about the God of Israel, the God of Jacob, they have no clue that these are not the same gods. And we're going to get into that in this Bible. You got to understand that, yes, your Bible speaks of many gods. And God, the God, was the leader of them all. God had a council with him leading a bunch of other gods. The Bible talks about it. So we're going to read 1 Kings 22:19 through 24. And I'm going to start here. It says, "I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him, on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, by what means? And he said, I will go out and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, you are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so. Now, therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets, and the Lord has declared disaster for you. So now when you read this is not the only verse. There are more verses that goes on where it's talking about God and his counsel. Psalms 89:7 says, a God greatly to be feared in the counsel of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. First Chronicles 16:25 says, for great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and he is to be feared above all gods, implying that there are more than one God. So when you get into this whole thing, it's so many verses that's actually talking about God and his counsel, and that these are beings, you might as well call them Elohim. These are different gods who have different jobs, and we're going to get into that. So we just read in the Bible, God speaking to his divine counsel. So God has this counsel, and he asks them to do things. You have other beings speaking in the council to other beings, and you have, stuff going on within this council. So, it starts to make sense, a lot of things, when you think about, well, wait a minute, it's not just God. There are more than one God. So you have reference to other gods in the Bible. So this is the thing, man. It's key pieces in the book that if you don't know about, it just throws everything out of whack. I mean, it could be one key point that's going to make about, 6-7 books of the Bible make sense. But the one key point is only going to be found in like 2 or 3 verses. And that's the thing with the Bible, which is why you got to read the entire book, and you have to study it and understand this. How many preachers are talking about this divine counsel? Not many of them. So now, who is this divine counsel? Who are these beings in this counsel? They are the Elohim. You got to understand, the Bible calls many different beings Elohim. You have the Bible calling demons Elohim, dead people Elohim. Remember in 1 Samuel, it called, when Samuel came back, it called him Elohim, his dead spirit, his dead body, whatever. And you have goddesses called Elohim, angels called Elohim. There's so many different beings that are called Elohims. All Elohim is not a name. It's basically like a title. It's basically like where you come from. Elohim are beings that come from the spiritual world, or spiritual beings. That's all it is. They refer to them as Elohims. So that's a major thing that you have to understand, that Elohims are just spiritual beings from, the spiritual world. Now, remember in the book of Enoch, you have the Watchers. Now, remember, the Watchers had jobs, one of which was to watch, to watch earth. These Elohim, or these members of the divine council, also have positions. They also have jobs. Now, you have the cherubim and the seraphim, who are both guardians of the throne of God. Now, when you read Isaiah 6:1-2, it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. But the cherubim you basically find in Mesopotamia, and the seraphim you find in Egypt. So now, this is the seraphim. This is what it looks like. As you can see, it has 6 wings. It is a serpent or a dragon with 6 wings, like the Bible speaks of. So now, when you look at depictions of the seraphim, you see that they are dragons or serpents. You see 6 wings. So you have basically like a flying serpent. So you have flying serpents with 6 wings, or flying serpents guarding the throne of God. So now when we go to Kemet, because as I said, the seraphim are Egyptian, more Egyptian, you always find depictions of them, and they always are associated with Egypt. So when you go to Egypt and you look at Akhenaten's throne, or Tutankhamun's, King Tut's throne, you can see the flying serpent on the throne. Take a look. You can see it on the back as well. You have flying serpents. As I said, there are many mentions of serpents or flying serpents in the Bible. When you read Isaiah 14, 26 through 29, it's talking about just that. It says, "This is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. For the Lord of hosts has purposed, and who shall disannul it? And his hand is stretched out, and who shall turn it back? In the year that King Ahaz died was this burden. Rejoice not thou, whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, that his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent." So this is a cockatrice. Take a look. It is like a dragon mixed with like a bird, as you can see. So what do they have on the W Rhea? You have a bird, you have a serpent. You got to understand and start putting this stuff together, because it's trying to tell you something. One of the weird things is when you look at the evolution that they give us of the dinosaur. There's something that I wanted to get into a little bit if I had time. But you can see that one of the explanations they give for the dinosaurs is that they evolved into birds. That, most of the major dinosaurs died out and others evolved into something else. That's one of the things that I want to tell us what the something else is, but I went into that a little bit in part 2. But the other thing is that most of these reptilians or dinosaurs evolved into birds, birds that we still see today. So now we already established that the cherubim and the seraphim are basically these serpentine beings. But when you get into the whole thing, they are basically shapeshifters. They could be 1 minute serpents or dragons or even, humans, as it talks about in the book of Enoch. So now the thing is, when you get into the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this is weird. Now in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have fragment 4Q, 543, 545, and 548, which is the Testament of Amram. And it basically identifies the Watchers with serpents. I'm just going to read this highlighted area. It says, "This consists again of a visionary recital of the most intense kind, similar to that in chapters 1 and 2, the firm foundation materials above, and in chapter 7. Here too, several identifications are made. First, in line 13 of manuscript B, the Enochic Watchers are identified with the serpent, with the visage of a viper, evidently the same serpent that is connected to the downfall of man in the Adam and Eve story. We have probably already encountered him as well in the tree of evil text above." I don't want to go through this whole thing, but it's basically saying that the Watchers were serpents as well. Now remember, as I said, these Watchers had jobs. So when we read Enoch chapter 20, it says, "And these are the names of the holy angels who watch. Uriel, one of the holy angels who is over the world and over Tartarus. Raphael, one of the holy angels who is over the spirits of men. Raguel, one of the holy angels who takes vengeance on the world of the luminaries. Michael, one of the holy angels, to wit, he that is set over the best part of mankind, and over chaos. Seraquel, one of the holy angels who is set over the spirits who sin in the spirit. Gabriel, one of the holy angels who is over paradise, and the serpents, and the cherubim. Ramiel, one of the holy angels whom God set over those who rise." So we have Gabriel supposed to be guarding these reptilians or these serpents, and they down on earth running amok according to the Bible. So, like I said, these beings had jobs. You had the watchers who had their jobs, and then you had people who are supposed to be watching the watchers. I mean, it's position, it's rank that's going on within this whole council, within this whole order when you pay attention. Now, when you look at it and you go in and start to read the versions of the story of the book of Enoch and this whole thing with the watchers, it talks about how the watchers were banished basically underground. We said below the earth, which is basically underground. So we read these stories about, reptilian beings live underground and, greys live underground and dragons and all this stuff like that. I talked about in part 2 about, the lizard people underground in California, the reptilians underground, and so many stories that you look at and you can see that, the Bible is, paralleling these stories. And it's funny because don't nobody talk about this. You never heard any of this stuff in church. This is why I am the way that I am with Christians and these Hebrews, because I know they are not reading the book. You don't hear them talk about none of this stuff. You can't look at the Bible and look at this stuff and just, brush it to the side. It's alluding to something. We know these serpents are most likely dealing with dinosaurs or dragons, which we know dinosaurs or dragons actually exist. This all has to do with some kind of parable or something that actually exists on earth or something that happened on earth. And the Bible is retelling it in a different way, not giving us the whole complete story, but giving it to us in parables. And it's up to us to compare it to real facts in real life to figure out the story, which is what this series is about. This whole Saturn, Satan, and God series is about exactly that. And I'm glad you guys was actually able to purchase this DVD and get this information. And yeah, I wanted to put this out for free, but I only had about 40 people actually buy the last DVD, so I wasn't able to raise enough that I needed to put the book out. So I didn't really want to sell this. I wanted to put it out, but hopefully I get enough people to buy it to where part 4 I could just put out for free, because this information should get out. But give yourself credit for being one of the people who feel like this is important, this information is important, and respecting this series and the information that's in it, because you're going to get something in this video that nobody is going to get, and it's not many people on YouTube talking about this stuff, and the ones who are completely off. The problem is a lot of these people are so scared of Egypt, and in case you haven't realized it, Egypt is the key to everything. That's why it is the most written about subject of all time. So not the Bible, not religion, it is ancient Egypt, because everything goes back there. Listen to me. Whatever truth you're trying to find, whatever you're trying to figure out, it's in Kemet, period. Everything goes back there. But these people can't wrap their head around it because their mind is into this whole, believing that Jesus was real, and they're taking the Bible literally, and they just look at Egypt as being this evil place, and they don't understand the wealth, the plethora of information that is there that basically answers all the questions. And when you go there and you study, everything just starts to unfold, especially when you know the Bible. Because if you don't know the Bible, you're not going to pick up on this stuff. But these people look at Egypt, or they run into something that has to do with Kemet, and they automatically say the devil, and they leave it alone. And that's by design. So this is why they don't get the whole story that I'm giving you now. So now the thing is this: if these people were smart, if they knew anything, if you go right now, we sitting here and we're talking about these serpents and shape-shifting beings and all this and that. And you can look at the Bible and see, these stories about serpentine beings and, serpents guarding the throne of God. If you go now, you fly to Egypt, right? And you go to Hypostyle Hall in the whole temple of Hathor. You walk in there and you look up, this is what you'll see. Now look there on the ceiling, you can see exactly what we're talking about. You have serpents basically walking upright, moving upright, and it almost look like they're shifting or changing into something else. And other glyphs that you can see them go from a serpent status to like a bird, but you see them in reptilian form as well. This is on the ceiling right now in the temple of Hathor. Now, the funny thing about these pictures is I actually had to buy these pictures because a lot of the ones you find on Google has the watermark on it, and I had to actually purchase these. Bullshit you not. but there were some good ones in there and I wanted to get them. And I didn't want to spend all day on Google trying to find ones that look like these. I have other ones as well that I bought. But, I mean, pay attention. Look at the imagery. This is everything we're talking about right here. I mean, what is that? You have these reptilian beings, you have these serpents. And then you look over on the wall and take a look at what you see. You have the Egyptians. They're huge, first of all. That's something we're going to get into. And you have this serpent inside this tube. Whatever that is, whatever's going on is dealing with this serpent. So, I mean, this all fits into everything that we're talking about and it's right there in Kemet and people have no clue. Now, this is from the book, Return of the Serpents of Wisdom. Now, remember, I talked about this in part 2. There were good serpents. Remember in part 2, I was talking about how the women worshiped these serpent beings and how they had, figurines and everything like that. And how, it was a good relationship. I mean, you find the same thing in the book of Enoch with the whole story about, remember the Watchers had to be good at some point and then they turned bad. Something happened in both cases. We don't know what happened with the women, going from worshiping them as good beings to, this whole story of war, but it says here, perhaps the earliest written record of the arrival of the serpent missionaries to Mesoamerica was composed by Bernardo de Salhan. They pronounce it Shalhan, kind of like lasagna. You got that G that makes a different sound, but Shalhan, a Franciscan monk who arrived in Mexico following the Spanish conquest and became the official historian for his people. Now, the whole thing with this guy is, he is well known and actually named the city Shalhan after him. So this tells you that this story is not just from some crazy guy. They named the city of Shalhan after him. And this city is in the whole state of Hidalgo in Mexico. So, this is somebody who is prominent that they give credit to that is reputable. So, when I go on to read this story, don't think it's just some wacko. This is somebody who is highly respected. So now it goes on to say, through numerous conversations with the Nahuatl old people, he learned that the forefathers of Mesoamericans were serpents who came east from the direction of Florida. They came sailing along the coast and disembarked in the port of Panuco, and their colonizing party was wise old men who had all the writings, the books, the paintings, which they had carried with them from their homeland, perhaps Atlantis, it says. The serpents proceeded to build a city called Tamuinchin. 200 years after Shalhan history was published, Edward Thompson, a United States consul and archaeologist who was sent to Mexico, was able to elaborate on the arrival of the early Mesoamerican serpent colonists. The source of much of his information came from certain Mayan brotherhoods, such as the secret brotherhood of Chatal, which Thompson was fortunate enough to gain initiation into. Through his spiritual mentors, Thompson learned that the meaning of the Tamuinchin was the place where the people of the serpent landed. And as Shahon had rightfully claimed many years earlier, the ancient city had been built along the banks of the Panuco River, the entrance to which was near Tucpan on the Veracruz coast. The founders of the port city Thompson discovered were the Chinese, or people of the serpent, who arrived in vessels possessing sides which shone like the scales of a serpent's skin. And to the simple natives who saw them approaching, they appeared to be great serpents coming swiftly towards them. Upon disembarking, these serpents appeared to be clad in strange garments, and they were about their foreheads emblems like entwined serpents. The wondering natives who met them at the shore saw the manner of their coming with the symbol of the sacred serpent, which they worshipped on their brows. So you find these stories about these serpentine beings. the early Mesoamericans coming from these serpentine beings, and they're basically coming in and colonizing and setting up civilizations in Mesoamerica. Now, when you go to Sago, Utah, a lot of people heard about this, the cave art there, where it shows depictions of basically what we see in Hyperstar Hall, in the Temple of Hathor, on the ceiling. You have these serpents, and it look like they walking, and they're doing something, but these beings look like serpentine beings or serpents moving upright. And the art is like dated between 8,000 and 500 BCE, and it's a lot of it. So we're talking about basically almost the same area, Mesoamerica and Utah. So you have stories that line up with each other about this, this serpent race. And it's weird how we are not told about this. And I also talked about the Chinese. Now, in the Yucatan, Chinese means people of the serpent. But in the Yucatan, you find stories about the Chinese being ruled by Itzimna. Now, soon as I found out this, when I started reading about the Chinese and I seen the name Itzimna, it automatically popped in my head, probably in some of your heads as well. I'm a huge Marvel Comics fan. So as soon as I heard the name Itzimna, I was like, wait a minute. Itzimna is from the Marvel Universe. Take a look here. It's Itzimna. You see him over there, and he is with other gods. But you also find Itzimna in the Council of Godheads. The Council of Godheads. Think about that. Now, let me read a little bit here. It says, and this council, elite of the divine pantheons of Earth, first met to confront the arrival of these titans from deep space. For those of you who do not know me, I am Athena, Parthenius, born fully grown from the brow of Zeus, until giver of life to the Inca, Horus, avenger of Osiris, pharaoh of the Black Land, Nzengi no Makido, father of the Japanese home island. All of us must stand united as this dark time descends upon us. If humanity falls, we fall with them. And at no point has humanity's extermination been so close at hand. So now this is why I tell people to pay attention to X-Men, especially the old comics. And when you look at the movies now, you can see why there's so much so-called Illuminati stuff, paired with the whole X-Men movies. So now it's weird how you get into these stories and you see how, mythology from a lot of different places fits into these Bible stories. When you read that comic, it's like gods from like every other race that's a part of that whole Marvel Council when you really pay attention. So you have this council, like this whole theme of a council we find in the Bible. We find it in the Marvel stories as well. They're trying to tell you something. You got to really pay attention. So now when you look at the whole thing with the Watchers coming down and having sex with women, when you look at that, we can almost compare it to the stories of, aliens coming down and doing stuff on Earth. So you basically have beings coming from, above and to Earth and doing things they shouldn't be doing. Now, the thing is, you hear the stories about the different races of extraterrestrials. So now when we read the Bible, when we go back in Genesis, when God says, let us make man in our image after our likeness, we know that the people he's talking to now is his council. We know he's talking to them. We also know that members of his council are reptilians. We also know that we have reptilian DNA in us. We share common traits. So suffice it to guess that some kind of pairing with a humanoid, which would be God, the main God himself, and his reptilian, and whatever else took place and created us. Now, we know something happened in the Bible as far as the Elohim. Now, in the Bible, God basically gives them jobs. He puts them over the nations. The problem is, and how, the war breaks out and how it becomes problems in heaven, according to the Bible in the book of Enoch, is that these angels basically turn the people against God and against Israel. So when we read Psalms 82, it says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly? This is the God of Israel talking to the other gods. And show partiality to the wicked. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All of the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Now it says in the footnote here, or fall as one man, O prince. So that's why the God of Israel is the one speaking out, because they are trying to turn against him. So when you read 83, it says, O God, do not keep silent. Do not hold your peace or be still, O God, for behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you have raised their heads. They lay crafty plans against your people. They consult together against your treasured ones. They say, come, let us wipe them out of a nation. Let the name of Israel be remembered no more. So this is why he is speaking out, and he's telling God, hey, do something to them. What's going on? You see what they're trying to do? They're trying to stop us. They're trying to shut us down. He's talking to God and pleading with him to take action against these other gods. So to the people who always say there is no other gods, there's only God. Yes, there are other gods clearly the Bible speaks of, but this one God is supposed to be ruling them all. But there is deception, as you can read. So, this is all figurative. This is not something that actually happened. These stories are alluding to something. So, as I said, we can look at the whole Nephilim coming down, the Watchers coming down, as aliens coming down. As a matter of fact, if you've ever seen the movie called The Devil's Tomb with Cuba Gooding Jr., this is exactly what they are implying about the Watchers or the Nephilim being aliens. Now, what are Graves doing in the movie about the devil? About the Bible. You have aliens in a movie about the Bible. So somebody's trying to tell you something. Also, when you look at the movie Prometheus was a Greek god, and also Prometheus is the name of one of the moons of Saturn. So in that movie, of course, you had aliens who basically created man. That's what the movie is implying. Aliens created man, and you had these people going to one of the moons of Saturn, basically. You can see they pass Saturn in the movie, and they go there and they find this alien being. Now, of course, they got to keep up white supremacy, and the alien being who's supposed to be amongst the creators of humans is this big, tall, white being. And it showed in the beginning of the movie as well as these white beings creating men. Now, we know for a fact that all races came from African people, from black people, but they got to keep up their white supremacy. Now, a lot of you have heard about the giant black beings. You heard people talking about black aliens making the rings of Saturn. And you heard about Norman Bergeron, who talked about these giant black beings, that he saw a picture of them, and he talks about them in his book. Now, so many people are obsessed with these giant black beings. There's videos all over YouTube, and I'm surprised, most people haven't just figured this out. To me, when I hear about giant black beings, there's only one place that comes to mind, and that's ancient Egypt. When you look at the depictions of the Egyptians and some of the hieroglyphics, you can see that they are giants. Look at them. A lot of people just figured that they made these to say that, oh, well, he was somebody of importance, that's why he was huge. But pay attention to some of the pictures. Take a look. It makes sense when you start looking at them and you think about the pyramids and you think about the size of the statues. I know this. If I had to build a statue of a pharaoh and he wasn't that big, I wouldn't waste the time and effort to build some of these colossal statues that were built of these pharaohs. Look at them. They are huge, humongous, giant. When you think about the blocks of the pyramids, these had to be some huge beings that started this whole thing off. If you've seen the movie Gods and King or the Gods of Egypt, you remember in that movie they had Horus as a giant. He was a giant. So it's trying to tell you something. These beings, I believe, these Egyptians, the original ones, were giants. They were huge. They were what the Bible described as Nephilim. And when you start to tie the whole story together, it makes a little more sense. Now, I know a lot of you are going to say, why are some Egyptians big and some like regular size? But I want you to think about something. Saturn is huge. Now, these black beings are supposed to be coming from Saturn. Saturn is a huge planet. Maybe it's something about Saturn or the atmosphere or something that causes them to be that size. It would make sense for them to be that size since the planet is so big, and for us to be the size we are since the planet is so big. Maybe it's something to that effect. I'm only speculating here. But the whole thing is, when you tie into the whole story, think about it. If you had something happen on Saturn, remember I talked about in part 1 how you had many prominent researchers say that Saturn was once inhabited and that Earth could have been one of the moons of Saturn, like Titan, which is supposed to be like Earth. And something happened. So just think, maybe something happened and you had the Egyptians, who were these tall beings, come to Earth and, start mankind here for whatever reason. And, it started out with the women. The women can, produce on their own. So think about the whole story in the book of Enoch. So after a while, you had these women here and they, creating a society. So you have the women would look exactly like the women in, coming from Saturn, or just like the Egyptians, because in the hieroglyphics, you see tall women as well, not just men, women as well. But imagine they coming down to Earth, just like it says, the sons of God, or these guys coming to Earth and seeing the women that they was fair, and they married them and they had sex with them. So you had these Egyptians creating life on Earth, or, starting a civilization on Earth. And because of our atmosphere, because of maybe something that has to do with that we were not as tall as they were. But you got to look at the range. Some of these giant beings, they say, range between 7 and 30 feet tall. So, 7, 8 foot. I mean, that's something normal that we see on the planet. I mean, we talking about Shaq and Hoops. So a giant coming down and having sex with a woman, I mean, that's Shaq and Hoops, or Yao Ming and his lady, or Manute Bol and his wife. We talking about that kind of a ratio. Yeah, it will look weird. They will look like giants to the average person when you look at their stature. But it is possible for them to have sex. But let's speculate here and say they came down, they had sex, they bear children. But we know something happened. We know something involving these reptilian beings took place. Now, if it's true and they can shapeshift, but they are of reptilian origin, they wouldn't be necessarily like the Egyptians or the ones who created us. These black beings, the only thing I can think of, far as black extraterrestrials or black beings, are these Egyptians, these tall Egyptians, and it has something to do with it. They was obsessed with space, as if they came from there. Something happened, some kind of war or something, to where the giant Egyptians are gone. Maybe they was killed off, I don't know. But something happened. We're going to get into that as we go along in this series. But something had to have happened to them. So when we look at this whole thing having to do with this council, I mean, this one leader in a congregation or a council, I mean, it's like the same thing with church. You have in the pulpit, you got the pastor, and he has his deacons, and you got the head usher, and you got the choir director. So you have the head dude and his council. I mean, it's the same thing with the president. You have the president, and he has his council. You know what I'm saying? It's just like the structure is set up exactly the way the Bible structure is set up. Same thing in ancient Rome. You had the Caesar, and you had his, Senate, just like America as well. So we can see these structures all over. And now what they're trying to do is create a one world order where there's one ruler. So you have this one ruler and, his council, just like basically in the Bible. So me personally, from my research, without getting too much into it, which I might later on if I have time in the next video, the whole thing is, I think that we are caught up in some kind of diplomatic something, some kind of politics, some kind of universal politics that's involving Earth. This is where my research is leading me. Now, I want to give you one of the reasons why I believe this, because one, and you're not going to believe this when I say it, I'm going to tell you, because I'm going to show you in part 4 how everything that they are doing to us is according to some kind of code. But technically, it's all legal. Everything that's going on. I know you're going to say, well, they murder people, this and that. It's legal. It's all legal, and they all abide by this one code. Like, think about it. These people want to take over the world. They can complete their agenda anytime. If they really wanted to wipe black people out, they could wipe us out at any time. But from my research, it seems like they're following some kind of code, that they have to make these laws and abide by these universal laws in order to do something. Because they obviously have the power to where they could have been taken over. Now, I wanted to be real, cocky and say it has something to do with the human spirit, or we're fighting back and we're winning against them. Understand, there are rules that they are following, and I'm going to point this out. It's amazing when you look into it. Nobody else is talking about this. There are rules and guidelines that they are following to do what they are doing. It's some kind of galactic, something going on that we are caught up in that's political, and it's something that is crazy that I want to get into in part 4 too, that has to do with the whole flat earth thing. It's stuff that we got to look at and we got to start digging into, because some things have a lot of validity, and I can't just cast them aside and say it's crazy without going into them, because I have encountered them in my research. So, we're going to get into that in part 4. To tie all this stuff together, you basically have the Bible telling us about this council. And this council is basically defying God, and they came here and did some things they wasn't supposed to do. Also, when you look at, Egyptian hieroglyphics, when you look at ancient stories and depictions, you have almost a story about these serpents as well coming down and, doing something here, starting something. We know man and the dinosaurs coexisted. Something happened with that situation, and we're going to get into that. But, it's a lot that I have to establish first before I go into certain areas. And it's just going to take a lot of time for me to do that. That's why I said I can't do 3. I got to do way more than 3 videos. But I'm going to get into a lot in part 4. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch and actually purchase this DVD. It actually means a lot. But, it's a lot more I have to get into before we get into quantum physics, or you will be lost. Trust me, you'll see what I mean when we get into this and how it ties in. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. But it's also going to tie into the stuff, these rules. Understand, as I said, we know why they do stuff according to numerology. We got to think about why they sacrifice on certain dates, why things happen at certain times, why we do things at certain dates and times. It's a whole system that they must follow, and it's rules to this whole thing. And once we understand it, it's going to be a way for us to really predict what they're doing, because they are bound by these rules. And I'm going to point that out. And it's going to be a way for us to actually win. I mean, to me, this is a dangerous DVD. And, I do get worried sometimes putting out information, but then I realize that, some people have alluded to this information in some way, shape, or form. And it's just up to us to put it all together.
So thank you guys for watching, and I'm so glad again that you purchased the DVD, you watched the whole thing and made it to the end. There's a lot more that's going to be in part 4 that's going to start tying things together. And it's going to be a part 5 and possibly a part 6 if I can't fit everything into part 4 and 5. So we'll see. This is the end of the DVD. Again, I appreciate you guys for purchasing it. And I'm really, really thankful for your support, and I really appreciate it. As I said, not so many people supported in the last DVD, so hopefully I can reach the goal that I'm going for in this DVD. And I'm glad you guys appreciate it and appreciate this series. I have another series that's really compelling that I'm going to be putting out after this series is done, and I think you guys are going to enjoy it just as much as this one. But again, I want to thank you guys for purchasing and for watching, and I'll see you guys next video.